Hey, what's up everyone, Julian here, hope you're all good and welcome to this quick start series on working with MongoDB and Python. Now MongoDB is a big, powerful database, so I'm not going to be covering everything in this series, but I think we'll just cover enough to kind of give you an introduction and wet your whistle when it comes to working with Python and MongoDB. So I'm going to split this series up into a few episodes. This episode is going to be just connecting to the database and defining some schemas, creating some documents, and kind of how we work with MongoEngine, which is the library that we're going to be using to interact with our MongoDB database. So let's jump into the demo here and show you what we're working with. So we're going to be using MongoDB Compass, which is a free cross-platform application from MongoDB, and it allows us to visualize and work with our MongoDB data. And we'll see that in use shortly, but I definitely recommend downloading this. It's a really, really nice tool. And we're also going to be using a library called MongoEngine, which allows us to create schemas. It allows us to save documents to the database. It allows us to make queries in a really nice Pythonic way, and I think you guys are going to really like it. So let's jump into the setup. We've got a editor open, and we've got a terminal with a couple of windows. So I'm not going to cover installing MongoDB in this video because there's too many variables, there's too many different operating systems, but you should be absolutely fine just Googling, a tutorial or finding a guide on how to install MongoDB on your system. One really nice way is to just, if you're using Docker, is to just pull the official MongoDB container and run it, and you'll be able to connect to it just fine. I'm using the Windows subsystem for Linux, so I start my MongoDB with the mongod command. And down here in the terminal, I see that it's I've got a message here saying listening and waiting for connections on port 27017. So you're going to need MongoDB up and running for this example. So just follow a guide on whatever operating system you're on, and you'll be just fine. So the next thing I'm going to do is come and create a virtual environment. So we do that with python-m-venv, and the name of the environment, I'll call mine env, and I'm also going to set a custom prompt of Mongo. And once that's installed, we're going to go ahead and install MongoEngine with pip. So give that a couple of seconds. And if we activate the environment, so source env bin activate, and there we go. If we do pip list, we see we don't have anything installed. So pip install MongoEngine. Let that do its thing, and that's the only dependency we're going to install in this episode. Okay, so let's just do pip list one more time, and there we go. We've got MongoEngine, and you'll see there we've also got PyMongo, and PyMongo is another kind of official wrapper or official library for working with Python and MongoDB, and MongoEngine just sits on top of that and provides just some different ways that, in my opinion, are much cleaner and much more Pythonic to work with MongoDB and Python. So if I run ls, you can just see I've got this main.py file in the same directory. So first thing we need to do is import MongoEngine. So to do so, we from MongoEngine. I'm going to import everything for now, but maybe in production you want to go through and just import specific things. So the first thing we're going to do is connect to the database. And it's as simple as a single function call to which we provide the name of the database that we want to connect to. If the database doesn't exist, then it's going to be created. However, if it does exist, then you're just going to connect to that existing database. So I'm going to call mine MongoDB. And if you're running in production with MongoDB, then I strongly advise that you have password authentication set up. And if you do, then it's just a case of providing a username, a password, and a authentication source in this connect function. So super simple to connect to MongoDB. And if I go ahead and save that and then run python main.py, that runs, we get no errors. Everything's looking pretty good so far. So that's how you connect to MongoDB. So the next thing we're going to do is actually start defining some documents and some schemas. So we do so with, let me just make a comment here. So defining documents. So documents come in a few different types. There's just a normal document, which has a kind of rigid enforced schema. And then you have what's called a dynamic document, which is a very loose type of document that will take any kind of keyword arguments and then get created in the database. So let's start off with just defining a regular document. And to do so, we create a Python class, which is very, very nice. So the first collection I'm going to create will be called users. So I probably should have pointed out that the collection is whatever the name of the class that you give. And then to that, we need to pass document. And what this does is it creates a subclass of this document class, which comes from MongoEngine, which allows us to use many of the MongoEngine fields. And what do I mean by fields? So if we take a look here, in fact, what I'm going to do is just do one example and then we'll come back and take a quick look at the docs. So for example, we can set a username value here, and I'm going to set that as a string field. And what that means is that this string field function here is going to validate that whatever value we pass in or set as this username must be a string. And if it's not a string, then it's going to throw an error. And that's important to us because we need to know what data types we're working with in our database. There'll be times when you want to do things like incrementing a value, decrementing a value, ordering by a certain metric, and it helps to know what type of value we've got in the database, whether it's a list, whether it's a dictionary, whether it's a string, integer, float. So if we come back and take a look at some of these fields, you can see there's tons. There's like over 30 fields. We've got binary fields, we've got dict fields, we've got email fields, we've got float fields, integer fields, string fields, etc. So you use these fields to correspond to the type of value you want, the data type, and that's really useful for us. So we can also do, we can also pass in arguments here to these fields. So for example, we can set unique equals true and required equals true. Now what this means is that any document in the user collection must have a unique username because we've provided this unique keyword here. And excuse me, what that means is that if we try, let's say for example, we create a new user with the name of John Doe, save that to the database, and then if we try to save another user to the database with the username of John Doe, it's going to throw an error. And that's really important because you can imagine if you've got any kind of user management system, maybe you want your users to have unique usernames or unique email addresses, and that's where you can use the unique argument here. And again, this required one just means that we can only create a document here if we have a value for username. So again, there's going to be certain times when you need a certain value in your database, and that's where you would use the required field argument here. And we can see if we take a quick look at the docs, we've got a few different field arguments. We've got DB field, required, default, unique with, primary key, and choices, etc. I'm not going to cover all of those in the documents, but just know that there are plenty of other field arguments that we can provide. So let's work on our user class. So what else is a user going to need? Probably an email. So we can use the email field, and we can also set that as unique. Doesn't necessarily have to be required. Can I spell? Let's go ahead and set a password. And I'm going to make this a binary field. And that will also be required. And let's do a few more. Let's set an age field of an integer. Let's set a bio as a string field. Another argument we can provide here in this field is a max length. So if we don't want our users waffling on about how amazing they are and writing 1,000-word essays, we can limit that with the max length argument. So let's do a few more. Let's set a list field. I'm going to call it categories. And an interesting thing you can do with list fields is you can either leave it as is and it's going to create an empty list in the document, Or you can provide a keyword like string field. And that means that this will only accept a list of strings. Or this could be a int field, which means this will only accept a list of integers. And we could do the same with float field. So that's how you can kind of further enforce some kind of validation here with list fields. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. How about let's go and set up some Boolean fields. So admin, I want that as a Boolean field, and I'm going to set a default of false. And what this means is that every time we create a new document, it's going to have this admin field, but it's going to be set as default by false, unless we explicitly say we want to set admin as true. And that's really useful. Maybe we can do another one, registered. Maybe you've got some kind of registration for users. So we could do another Boolean field with a default again of false, because we want to explicitly tell our database or tell our application that the user is registered. And I think the last one I'm going to create is a date created field, and we can set that as a date time field. And I want to provide a default here, so I need to import something. So I'm going to go ahead and import from datetime, import datetime. I'm also going to go ahead and import OS, because we're going to use OS to create our binary password here. So let's set a default date. So when this user class gets saved to the database, it's going to create a default datetime object for us. So default equals datetime dot UTC now. And one thing to note, you don't need to provide the parentheses here on UTC now. Otherwise that's going to mess things up. Just provide the datetime.utc now, or whatever kind of format you want this datetime object stored as. So I think that will do for our user fields. Another thing we can do with our MongoEngine classes here is we can create methods just like you would a normal Python class, which is really, really useful, especially if you're working with any kind of web application. Maybe you want to call a quick method on a class which is going to return something. So for example, we can you might have a method that's going to log a user in, log a user out, maybe return some JSON, and that's what we're going to do in this example. So I'm going to go ahead and import JSON, because what I want to do is write a class method that is going to return a JSON object of our user. So to do so, we just create a normal class method. So I'm going to call it JSON and pass itself. I'm going to create a user dict variable. And then what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go ahead and create all the values. Just for this example, we'll just create a couple. So we can do username, and then we just call self.username. Email will be self.email. And I think that'll do. I'm not worried about the date created. And then what we can do is return json.dumps, and then we'll throw in our user dict. So there we go. We can create class methods that we can call on our documents, which is really, really useful. Another thing we can do when we create our schema is create some meta information about the class or the document. And we do so with the meta attribute down here. And there's loads of different options what you can provide to meta. So we can do things like creating indexes, which allow us to perform much faster lookups in our database. So for example, this user class, I'm probably going to be looking them up using either their username or email. So let's go ahead and create some indexes. And we do so with this indexes keyword followed by a list. And then we give it a list of the different fields that we want to use in our database as indexes for the user document. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and throw in username, and I'm going to throw in email, because they're the things that I'm probably going to be looking up the user with the most often, so I want them to be the fastest. The next thing we can do is set a default ordering for this collection. So for example, we can throw in ordering and then another list, and then I'm going to give it a value of date created, which is another one of our fields, but then I'm going to prepend that with just the minus symbol. So this is going to order them in a descending fashion, which is what I want. So this is what we can do with meta. There's loads of other things you can do with the meta, so go ahead and check out the docs for that, but this is just, like I said, an introduction, and this should be good to get you going. So there we go, we've created our first document, and again, the name of the collection is whatever name we give the class, so our collection will be user, and because we've passed in this document keyword, this has now been subclassed to document, which means kind of we got this enforced schema here. Okay, so let's move on to dynamic documents and take a look at the differences. So dynamic documents. So a dynamic document is going to look very similar to a normal document, like the one that we've just defined. We start by creating a class and we give it the name. So I'm going to call this blog post. So blog post will be the name of our collection. And to that, rather than pass in document, I'm going to pass in dynamic document. And for example, we could just throw in a pass and leave it as is. And then whenever we create a new instance of the blog post class, we can pass it any kind of key value arguments, and it's going to go ahead and create a new document within the blog post collection with whatever we pass it, essentially. So there's no enforced schema like there is here in the document class. So this is, of course, it's got pros and cons, depends on your use case, but it can be really handy to have a dynamic document if you've got the odd chance that you might be taking some information in that you're not going to define a schema for. So for example, here in our blog post, let's go ahead and we'll give it a title, and I'll make that string field. Let's go ahead and give some content. Again, that'll be a string field. We can have an author. Now this is where things get interesting with MongoDB and MongoEngine. So we can create what's called a reference field. And what a reference field takes is a reference to another document. So I'm going to throw in user, because the author of this blog post is going to be a user. So what we can do is throw in the reference field here, and then we provide it with whatever kind of document that we're going to be referencing. And I'm able to throw in user here without getting any errors or any problems. However, if we hadn't created this type of document yet, if we haven't defined this class or this schema, this wouldn't work. So for example, what you would have to do is just change it from user without quotes to user with quotes. So that's just something to be aware of. The reason I'm able to do this is because we've already created this user schema. So what this is going to do is be a reference field to a user. And again, that's something we can pass in. I think the last thing I'm going to throw in is a date created field. And that again will be another date time field, and it's going to be the same as above here. So I'm just going to copy that and drop that in. Now, we are going to make this a dynamic document because we're going to pass in some values that we haven't defined in our schema. So I think for now, maybe we can just throw in some meta, just like before. We'll throw in the indexes keyword. And again, I want this to be indexed with or by the title, because I think that's going to be the thing that we're going to be looking up this document in the database using, the title. And then we'll throw in ordering just like above. And again, I'm going to nab that and just drop that down here. I want my blog post to be sorted by the date of creation. So I think that will do now for defining our dynamic document. So I think what we'll do in this episode is we'll just go ahead and create an instance of both of these and save them to the database and take a quick look at MongoDB Compass here, so you can see that in action too. So to save a document, we go ahead and there's lots of different ways, but I like this way, is create a new variable and then we call the name of the document or the name of the class that we want to create. So ours is user, and then we can call the .save method. But of course we need to provide it some values. So let's just go ahead with a few for now. Let's do username, email, password, age, bio, and admin. So username, let's do John Doe, let's keep it traditional. Let's provide an email, so jdoe@gmail.com. Let's provide a password, so we'll use os.urandom and we'll make this 16 long. What else did we say we're going to throw in? Maybe an age, bio, age equals 32, bio can be hello world, not the most interesting bio in the world, and let's just do admin. Admin can be true. Okay, so we've got our user. Let's go ahead and create an instance of blog post. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. In fact, we'll do it differently. I don't even need to save this as or create a new variable here. We can just do blog post, and again I'm going to call the save method, and then to that let's provide a few values. So we've got a title will be my first blog post. Let's provide some content, so MongoDB and Python is awesome. Let's throw in the author. So this is where the reference field comes into play. So you can see here we've created this user variable, and that's a new instance of the user class. And because we've defined that the user is going to be the reference field for author, we can go ahead and pass in user here to the author. We've got a date created, but that's going to happen automatically. So why don't we go ahead and throw in something that we haven't defined, and then we can see the dynamic document in use. So let's go and create some tags. That's something that you normally have in a blog post. So we can do Python, MongoDB, and MongoEngine. Maybe we can throw in a category of MongoDB, and I think that will do us for now. So this is how we're saving the documents, and we're going to cover more on saving documents in the next episode. So this is just going to be a quick look. So I think that's everything I want for now. So let's go ahead and run our file. Maybe we can just print something at the end. Print. Done. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, I've got an error. That's why. Why didn't you guys tell me? Okay, try again. Done. Okay, so let's fire up Compass and take a quick peek at our MongoDB. Okay, so this will be what you're greeted with when you fire up Compass, and I'm going to leave everything as default because we don't have any kind of auth set up. We're not messing with any of the default ports. But if you did have authentication set up, then you can come down here, select username, password, for example, and then provide that. I'll leave that as none and go and connect. What do we call our database? Mongo-dev-db. Okay, so databases will show up on the left, so MongoDB. And there we go, we've got our two collections. We've got blog post, and if we click on that, we can see, I hope you guys can see, I hope that's not too small. Maybe I can zoom in a wee bit more. So there we go, we can see we've got our name of the collection, and when you click into it, you can see all the individual documents. So here we've got a document with a unique object ID. So one of the great things about MongoDB is that it assigns things a unique ID whenever you create one, and that's really, really useful. And we'll explore using that more in the future. You can see we've got our title, content, author, and you'll notice that the author field here is a reference to another object ID. So this again is going to be something that's really, really useful because it allows us to build up these relationships between different documents in our code, in our database. So super useful. You can see we've got the tags. We got this tags array here, which, because this is a dynamic document, we didn't define this in our schema. This is just something that we provided when we actually created the instance of the blog post class. So that's a dynamic document in action, and we can see there also we've got the category field, which again we didn't define in our schema because this is a dynamic document, it just works. So let's take a look at our user category here, and we can see we've got one user because we only create one, again with a unique object ID. We've got a username, email, a binary password, the age, bio, categories, which is just an empty array, which we defined here in our schema. Categories was a list field. And then we've got admin true, registered false, and our date time object. And another thing we can do here, if we click on each of the individual collections, we can take a look at the indexes tab, and we can see we've got these indexes. So title was an index which we set in the meta. So indexes title. And if we take a look at user and look at the indexes, you can see here we've got email and username, because these are the fields that we're going to be looking up, and we want those indexes for those lightning fast lookups. So I think that's going to cover everything for this episode. So maybe we can just recap. So connect to a MongoDB database using the connect function. Then we can define our schemas. A document is a fixed schema, and a dynamic document is a kind of loosely coupled schema that doesn't enforce any kind of fields. And we can pass any value we want to a dynamic document, and it's just going to go ahead and create it and dump it in the database. We can create class methods, which we can then go ahead and call. And I think what we're going to do, I'm going to save that for the next episode, because we're going to be exploring more about how we save documents, query the database, and then we'll go ahead and call some of these class methods, maybe create a few more as well. Setting up some meta is as simple as creating this meta dictionary and providing a few different values depending on what you want to do. Indexes are going to create an index which will allow faster lookups, and ordering is going to affect how, when we query a collection, how the documents come back to us in what order. So again, using some of the fields and some of the field arguments just give us further validation and just let us know that yes, we know what data types we're working with in our database. And it may not seem completely obvious now why you would need that, but in the future, when you want to try and do things like incrementing values, ordering by certain numbers, sorting high to low, it's really useful to have these different data types in our schema. So I think that's going to cover everything for now. Like I said, we're going to look more at saving documents in the next episode, because there are a few different ways and a few things that I think you guys will find interesting when it comes to saving documents. And I think that's going to wrap it up for now. So if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe. Really appreciate you sticking around and watching the video. I know we're at half an hour now, so thanks for hanging out, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found something useful. I hope you learned something. And as always, text-based version in the description below. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. So if we take a look at the description here, a dynamic document class allowing flexible, expandable, and uncontrolled schemas. So what that means is that we can, for example, we could leave our class like this. And then whenever we create a new instance of this class, we can pass it keyword arguments, and it's going to go ahead and create a new document in the blog post, my head's gone blank. Hang on.